through a massive enterprise software reset. Many on Wall Street and out on Silicon Valley, they're calling it the SaaS apocalypse. And for almost a decade, general enterprise software companies, they enjoyed endless valuation multiples, and mostly because they could grow top-line revenue just by adding more and more seats to their platforms. But today, the market is ruthlessly cutting down companies that don't have an ironclad technological moat or a direct high-margin way to actually monetize artificial intelligence. So that tells us that the days of growth at any cost for standard software as a service platforms are officially over. And you have to think about it. If your enterprise software can be replaced by a custom internal AI agent built by a couple of junior developers over a single weekend, your business model may be in serious trouble. And the market's finally waking up to the fact that a lot of these apps were just user interfaces sitting on top of a basic database. But out of this SaaS apocalypse, this carnage, we've got a few industrial grade software giants that are actually expanding their moats. They aren't just surviving the AI reset, they're controlling the infrastructure beneath it.
Now, before we continue with today's episode, if you want market-beating stock picks from our analysts, make sure to check out the pinned comment and the description. Using that link gets you a promotional offer as our thanks for being a viewer. Thank you, and let's get back to today's episode.
Today, we're breaking down 3 stocks that we think are navigating the storm exceptionally well. Jose, kick us off.
Thank you, Rachel. And I'm starting with Autodesk, ticker ADSK. The market has been treating it like any other generic SaaS stock getting hit by macroeconomic headwinds. But that is a massive, massive mistake. Autodesk is not a payroll app, and it's definitely not a marketing automation tool. They own the engineering, architecture, and construction workflow globally through AutoCAD, Revit, and Autodesk Construction Cloud. If you want to build a skyscraper, a bridge, a highway, or a car, you have to use their software. In their recent fiscal quarter 1 2027 print, they raised their full year revenue outlook, guiding for full year revenue of over $8 billion, alongside incredibly strong non-GAAP operating margins. CEO Andrew just announced a massive acquisition of Main10X, which connects real-world field operations data back into their design ecosystem. They are moving digital twins from static models to predictive AI-driven architectures. They aren't being disrupted by AI. They are the ones embedding it into real-world manufacturing and engineering. And when you control the foundational data format for an entire global industry, you don't get disrupted as easily as the market thinks.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great point. That's a real structural moat that they've built. And AutoCAD is practically an industry religion. Nobody changes their CAD software on a whim because the retraining costs for an engineering firm are astronomical. But I think there's also some real world friction here to think about. So Autodesk's customer acquisition costs, their payback period, actually turned negative recently because sales and marketing investments outpaced their incremental revenue growth. Obviously, Autodesk is spending a lot of money to bring in that next dollar of revenue. The business model is very much tied to the health of the macro economy and very specifically construction and real estate. So I think the question that comes to mind is if we see, say, a prolonged downturn in commercial real estate or high interest rates stalling global infrastructure products, does Autodesk have that pricing power to keep growing when operating expenses are climbing?
Rachel, that's definitely a fair pushback here on the marketing spending inefficiency. And management definitely needs to keep tightening that belt on their go-to-market execution. But here's why the structural moat wins over the cyclical macro fears. Their locked-in deferred revenue and long-term commitments give them extreme multi-year visibility. Even if a developer slows down a new project, they don't cancel their subscription of licenses, right? Because their entire legacy data, history, and daily operational workflows exist inside the Autodesk ecosystem. You can't just pause your software subscription when your entire architecture blueprint library is built on the proprietary stack that Autodesk has created. It's an incredible sticky enterprise structure. The market is giving us a discount on a global monopoly because it's miscategorizing it as something that's going to be replaced by AI. They are shifting away from traditional seat-based licensing into consumption and project-based tokens, which is what a lot of AI software companies should be doing, which means as projects get more complex, Autodesk makes more money regardless of how many human heads are actually clicking the mouse and if it could be an AI agent running that software behind it.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Jose, and thank you for that. I want to move on to your second pick. I think this one is a really fascinating business. It sits right at the intersection of enterprise software and the hardware boom.
Yeah, so this one is Synopsys, ticker SNPS. If you thought kind of Autodesk was the blueprint for construction, Synopsys is the blueprint for AI chip development, right? And then this is the platform you need to design AI chips. And Synopsys is one of the kings here in the EDA, electronic design automation software. You cannot design advanced microchips from NVIDIA, AMD, or any other players without Synopsys. They just reported their quarter two fiscal 2026 numbers, posting non-GAAP earnings per share of $3.35, beating Wall Street estimates. More importantly, very similar to Autodesk, they did raise their full-year revenue guidance midpoint to roughly $9.6 billion. Every single big tech company trying to build their own custom AI chip to save power on cost has to buy massive software licenses from Synopsys. On top of that, they are aggressively integrating their massive acquisition of Ansys, which allows engineering to simulate physics and thermal stress on chips before they ever go to the foundry. As chips get smaller and more dense, the physics limitations becomes brutal, and Synopsys solves that with their software.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the other interesting points to make is if you want to make silicon, you pay the Synopsys tax. But I think we also have to talk about the valuation of the business. And there are some messy mechanics under the hood, if you will. Synopsys, they're trading at a massive premium. So they are priced for absolute perfection. And if you look at the company's GAAP net income for the first half of the fiscal year, there was a sharp drop, for example, in Q1 to under $100 million. And a lot of that going back to merger restructuring costs, complex accounting related to the Ansys integration. And if the integration of Ansys hits a snag, or if the design IP business faces more export restrictions in regions like China, I think there's a justifiable concern that that premium multiple could leave investors with a very minimal margin of safety. So how do you square that valuation risk?
I mean, Rachel, like always, you hit the nail on the head when we kind of look at some of the bearish case around here, especially here regarding the GAAP net income noise and the geopolitical risk, which is real. The Ansys transaction, unfortunately, has created a massive bite to swallow, and it creates a temporary drag on reported earnings due to any upfront cost and fees and transaction friction. But if you're looking at the underlying non-GAAP net income, which strips a lot of this non-cash accounting adjustments, it was a strong quarter, well over $700 million for quarter one alone. CEO is treating this as a transitional integration year. Their total backlog is sitting at well over $11 billion. And when big tech commits to custom chip designs, those are 3 to 5 multi-million-dollar commitments that don't get canceled midway. Regarding China, though, domesticating EDA software is incredibly difficult. We are talking about decades of mathematical algorithms embedded into these tools. A startup can't just recreate it. Speaking of which, Rachel, I know you brought another key player in this space today. Why don't you tell us about stock number 3?
Yeah, I'm pitching Cadence Design Systems today. It's ticker CDNS. You laid out a strong case for the EDA software sector, but Cadence is really where, in my opinion, the financial operational efficiency really shines the brightest. Cadence is a company that's kept its head down. It's got an incredible history of executing flawlessly, routinely puts up gross margins well above 80%, operating margins touching 30%. So Cadence's secret weapon right now is their Palladium and Protium emulation systems. So when companies design a 3 nanometer or a 2 nanometer chip, they can't afford a mistake before manufacturing. A single botched mask set at a TSMC foundry costs tens of millions of dollars. It sets a product timeline back by months and months. So Cadence sells proprietary hardware supercomputers loaded with their software that actually mimic the physical chip before it gets printed. So NVIDIA, for example, they use Cadence systems to test their Rubin and other upcoming architectures before sending them to production. And their system design analysis business is growing at an exponential rate, more than 20% year over year right now. They don't have any integration risks from recent acquisitions. So I do think this is a really efficient and well-run play on the silicon boom.
Yeah, Rachel, I love Cadence margins profile, and their emulation hardware is definitely elite. And like you mentioned, right, they don't have a lot of the noise that Synopsis is having. It's basically a cash printer. But one of the things is just the competitive dynamic. Synopsis buying Ansys wasn't just a random acquisition. It was a defensive and offensive chess move at the same time. By combining chip design with Ansys' world-class macro-scale physics simulation, Synopsys can offer a completely unified end-to-end platform for system-on-chip analysis. They can simulate how a chip behaves inside a server rack, inside a car, or under extreme heat. If Synopsys successfully integrates Ansys over the next 18 months, doesn't that leave Cadence standalone software looking a bit isolated? Can Cadence actually maintain those 30% operating margins if they have to aggressively ramp up their own internal R&D spending to match Synopsys' new physics capabilities? Aren't they at risk of losing kind of this full system design battle?
Yeah, I think those are really important questions, but there's some very good reasons why I don't think this is a concern for Cadence investors. I mean, the EDA market is not a winner-take-all game. It is very much a triopoly. Obviously, you've got Synopsys, you've got Cadence, you've got Siemens as a third player in this space. But this is a space where major chip designers deliberately use multiple companies to avoid vendor lock-in. So you've got Apple, Qualcomm, NVIDIA. They maintain massive licenses with both Synopsys and Cadence because they really want their engineering teams to cross-verify designs. That's really built into the business model as well. So that's something important to note. And Cadence is really not standing still on the simulation front either. You know, they've rolled out their own organic tools. Millennium is one example. This is a tool that uses AI-driven computational fluid dynamics to simulate aerodynamic and thermal properties. And they're building these tools natively in-house. They're not buying, legacy software companies and trying to stitch different code bases together. And that's really, really key to their model. They're doing good in terms of managing their debt. This is very much a quality compounding software business. And I think that this is allowing them to pivot faster and potentially better than their rivals.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel. And I think the bottom line here for this episode is the SaaS apocalypse is trying to filter out the weak software players who rely on cheap capital and see expansion. But while it's trying to do this, it's kind of punishing certain stocks that shouldn't deserve to be there, who have strong moats, who have massive data gravity, and who can have mission critical applications that the global economy literally cannot run without. So let me know in the comments below, fools. What are some of the stocks you guys are looking through the SaaS apocalypse? If you guys enjoyed this episode, make sure to hit the thumbs up and the subscribe button, and see you all next time.